Welcome from E2, and I really appreciate the fact that we had burritos and now I get to speak. I really appreciate that a lot. But just in case you don't know, E2 is a ministry dedicated to training elders in the church, equipping elders to lead in the church, and essentially, without making this a long commercial, we have got a variety of levels of relationship. We have product that if you want to read, wonderful. If you want to watch videos, great. If you say, but can you come in and do a one-day seminar? We have a whole team accessible. If you want somebody to come in and speak on a given topic, lead a retreat, etc. Well, can you come in and do a multi-day thing? Absolutely. Can you come in and do church coaching as well as like assessment and revitalization? Absolutely. So whatever level of relationship you're interested in, I'm sure we could have a good discussion on that. We do have a conference that we conduct every single year. It's called Lead Well. It's in March, and it's in Indianapolis. And if you go online, there is our website. I put it up there because if you go to that website and you say, well, I really wanted to purchase some of those books, but those are just for show, you can go to the store, click. If you say, I want free stuff, there's a tab that says free stuff, and you can download it. It's just for you to take. Well, I like the idea of seeing a video, but I don't know what they're like. Watch several free videos. And if you want information about that conference, lead well, click. And by the way, last year, I think we had 800 elders, deacons, and ministers show up. And we actually have to cap it at 1,000 this year. So if you're interested, please go on there and look. I'm going to do something very quickly, then we're going to get into this. I'm going to give you my mobile number. Okay? And by the way, this is my only mobile. I do not have a burner. Okay? It is 217 737 3798. That number again is 217 737 3798. If you would like this presentation emailed to you, just email me and say Nexus presentation, and I will email it to you. Okay, that way you don't have to worry about taking copious notes. But you do have a handout to help us, and this is going to be very interactive. There's going to be periods where I go, I'm going to pause, and I want you to discuss at your table what we just talked about. Okay, so I'm not speaking for an hour and a half solid. And all God's people said, amen. I am the Texas regional coach for E2. I got that position because I moved to Texas. And they said, we want you to have, you're our presence in Texas. Excellent. I'm actually a full-time professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, where Gene Getz taught. And so wonderful being right after him. But the simple fact, yeah, great. It's like, yeah, last time I was at a conference, I got to preach right after Bob Russell. Great. Okay. But this will be a little like, we're going to make it a little more interactive. There'll be times when I say discuss around your table, and then we'll move on. And that way, basically, you can process while we're sitting here. But when I want to talk about not just simply our own spiritual growth, but the simple premise that leaders create leaders. And if you're not spiritually formed as a leader, then what are you producing as leaders? So I want to talk about the whole process of developing eldership, developing leaders in the church. And as we get into the middle of it, we're going to talk about how do we help spiritually form? How do we take care of ourselves as a leader to make sure we're spiritually mature? And I just want us to look at a couple of things. First off, Jim, we have a problem. The number one phone call that we receive at E2, because by the way, we put our cell numbers in the books. So my phone goes off a lot. The number one phone call we get goes like, we're getting older and there's nobody stepping up to become an elder. Our elder team is getting older. We're ready to step off the team, but there's nobody to replace us. That is the most common phone call we get. Nobody is maturing to the point of being, remember what Gene Getz said? It's not quantity, it's quality. They're not maturing to the point that we can call them in to be elders. What do we do? Now, we listen to them, we ask a few questions to understand their church situation. But eventually, we have to ask the question, what do you do specifically to grow up the next generation of leaders? And we are met with one of three answers. Can you repeat the question? Number two, we get an answer that says, well, there's Sunday school and small groups. That's for everybody. I said specifically for this. And thirdly is what? Nothing. My family's from the Midwest, and we just moved to Texas in June. Great weather, by the way. We were in the Midwest, and the simple fact is this is like a farmer standing out in a field in October, and it's completely empty. And he's going, I really should have been busy in April. I really should have been planting seed way back then for the crop to come in. And so we always say you don't have a leadership problem, you have a discipleship problem. You have a discipleship problem. And the simple fact is we're talking about growing leaders. You have to make this an intentional matter for current leaders. The farmer has to plant early to have the crop. If you're going to have somebody to essentially step into the shoes you're going to vacate, you have to intentionally be thinking next generation, who are we planting, who are we growing? Because if not, it's a difference between weeds and crops. Weeds just grow up naturally and anywhere and everywhere. And if you want numbers, you can just grab people and they're weeds. Crops, you can tell when you're driving by a crop, what do you see? Rows. Very definitive, somebody cultivated this. We need a crop of new leaders. That only happens when we're intentional about it. And it is about relationship, not a program. I'm not talking about just buy our books. No. Honestly, that would not work. If it was just a matter of a program to train elders, that would be simple. But the simple fact is, if you're going to train leaders in the church, it really is a matter of building relationship, a discipling relationship over time, that long exposure to cultivate. Because it is a long-term process. It's not a quick, short-term fix. See, that's the sad part. When that phone call comes in, we're like, well, maybe we can plant some winter wheat. By the way, I'm not a farmer. My wife is from a farming community. Winter wheat's that last crop you can put in and probably get a yield before the winter hits. We might be able to get something going, but the long-term fix you don't have time for. And I tell people, think of farming, not manufacturing. Manufacturing is you put all the raw material in, let it go through the process, and what do you get? I served in Michigan for 10 years. I was in Flint, the headquarters of the UAW, hometown of it. All kinds of auto factories. You give them all the raw material, it went into the factory, what pops out the next end? A Buick, okay? The simple fact is manufacturing is great. People are not made of metal. That's the point. Think of farming. You have to grow, you have to nurture, you have to care for, you have to weed, you have to think of farming. It's that long-term process. My wife is from a town of 39 people. By the way, there's literally a physical water pump where the town, two roads cross in the middle of town. That's where you get your water from. She lives 6 miles outside of town on a farm. So all my brothers are what? Farmers. And I see them work and work and work in March and April and May, And then they do what? Wait. And they may have to do some things to make sure the weeds don't get up or locusts don't. But the bottom line is it is a matter of just waiting for growth and for there to be a harvest. Because we're looking for quality over quantity. I appreciate the New Testament always talks about elders, overseers, plural. But the greater emphasis isn't on the number of leaders, it's on what? The quality. And so who's responsible for developing these leaders? By the way, so many times the knee-jerk reaction in a lot of churches is, well, it's the pastor, it's the minister, it's the preacher. And I'm like, that can't fall on one person's shoulders. Leadership comes from other leaders. Leaders build other. We always say, become a disciple that makes disciples. Well, become a leader who does what? Makes leaders. Because a leader can't learn from a non-leader. So the point being here, you growing leads to other people growing. And that's the way it ought to be. So I'm going to talk about step by step. If I'm going to break this into steps, what can we do to do this all the way from ground zero up? So the first step is you have to prepare believers to become leaders. And by the way, I'm saying this, what is your congregation's path toward discipleship? If somebody says, what is my next step? I accepted Christ, now what? Now what? What's the next step? Or is it just kind of a dead-end road? By the way, without going into great depth, I have a whole presentation on the 5 levels of engagement for a healthy church. But there has to be a level of engagement for people outside the church. Okay, this is your community outreach, their awareness of you, connecting with the outside, making sure you don't forget that beyond these walls and the glass is a whole community to be reached. It's not just about who's already in here, it's about who. Okay. But once they start showing up and once they start asking questions, you have to evangelize them. So people get trained to do evangelism. Now, once they accept Christ, they have to be assimilated, built into the church. How do we bring them in? And then once they've been in the church for a while, we just don't say, now, occupy a chair, sit in a pew, warm it on Sunday morning, and you've done your job. No. The next step is, okay, how do you grow further? What's your next step? By the way, a little footnote, I teach Christian education, educational ministries, and leadership. Every study we have done has proven one thing that has shocked a lot of people. For a new believer, small groups are the number one best way to grow spiritually for 2 years. At 2 years, the growth plateaus. And all of a sudden, every study is, if they just stay in there, they're stuck. They're plateaued. Their spiritual growth has stalled. That means if we're not going to fall backward, it's just going to do what? So you have to shift gears and have something else for them. And the 2 things that came up that seem to work is deeper study, which, by the way, may I say, probably means a classroom or seminar environment where you can go beyond the devotional reading of Scripture, beyond what a small group can really offer, and answer some tough questions. Or B, opportunities to serve. And so once again, that new believer who's in that new members thing should be pointed toward what's next, because you're not going to be a new believer all the time. And then the 5th level is simply this. What happens when you do have these volunteers or these people who are going to get deeper study, and then you begin to notice, this one shows up early and does great work, and other people go to them to find out how to do it. This person isn't a leader yet, but they're a what? A potential leader. This person not just shows up to the class, but wants to know if they can read something beyond. Is there a book you would suggest? Is there a video online you could suggest? This person really seems to be keen in wanting to study more. Once again, not a leader yet, but what? Potential. And once again, who has to be on the lookout for those people? Leaders. Because only leaders will recognize potential of other leaders. So, I just wanted to show you this. 5 years ago, I was actually serving full-time at a church. I was still teaching part-time. I gave up my full-time teaching position at Lincoln Christian University, took a church in Georgia, and was there for several years, and then went to another college. But the simple fact is we had to align our ministry. How are we going to equip people to become disciples? And we talked about our mission, our values, our strategy, and our tactics. And I just put this up here to go, we were very intentional about what we did at church to make sure we could always answer the question, what's next? And can we really take people deeper into the Word, deeper into ministry, deeper in their commitment to the church? Could we really do that? So I'm going to press pause here. And just simply around your table, there's a handout that has this first principle, prepare believers to become leaders. How do you mature someone from the baptistry to full Christ-likeness? What is your discipleship path? What is your discipleship path? What is your next step sequence? So go ahead, take a few minutes. But once again, you may be sitting with people from your church, so that would be good. You may be sitting with people from other churches. You can cross-pollinate. You can share ideas. Yeah, there should be the one that has just the points on it. 2, next step. Point number 2, next step, develop a set of expectations. What do you expect a new leader to really be like? Now, what's the kind of person you're looking for? Now, by the way, you could say, well, now, Jim, wait, we have Acts, 1 Timothy, Titus, 1 Peter. Yes, I understand. Those are great portraits. That's scriptural. We're going to look at the scripture. We're going to, draw from it. I love that assessment. By the way, I actually had the first edition of Gene's book. We used it in class when I was in college. So I'm like, yes, it was great to see that there's a revised edition. Fantastic. But let's be very, very honest with each other. There's the scriptural requirements, and then there's the ones we add. For example, the Bible never actually mentions elders' meetings. And all God's people said? Amen. Okay, but the simple fact of the matter is, I'm like, we probably would like them to attend meetings. In other words, we might have to add some specific expectations. And also the Bible says more about leadership than just the qualifications. So we really need to engage in a biblical study of leadership. And remember, they're not leaders yet. They're just showing the potential to be a leader. But we still have to be on the lookout for them. Anybody ever play this when they were a kid? Where's Waldo? Okay, if I said, how were you able to find Waldo? Oh, there you go. You wore a striped shirt. What else? You look different than the rest. That's the whole point. He looks like this. So the assumption is you can find Waldo because you know what you're looking for. And therefore, as you're looking, you would see, oh, there he is. If you don't have a set of expectations for what a leader looks like, what are you looking for? We're not sure. We're not going to find them in the crowd. So what do potential leaders have? Well, maybe it's something as simple as they set a Christian example. They have consistent participation. This person seems to show up a little better than the 1.7 times a month that full-time people show up. They're actively serving. They're already volunteering in a role They're already engaged. By the way, relationally responsive. He mentioned that. These people seem to be sensitive to other people. They seem to be friendly. They have good chemistry with people. And not to mention that peer recognition. Other people seem to say good things about that individual. By the way, Gary Johnson calls this the call model: confirmation, your abilities, lifestyle, and longing to serve. So he talks about when you really want to look for somebody who seems to have other people affirming them. They have the right abilities. Their lifestyle is in check with Scripture, and they seem to have the desire to want to do more. That's someone we can readily go, this person would make a great leader. So do you have a description of potential leaders? Who to be on the lookout for? So if I pressed pause, this might be one you just have to go around the table and say yes or no. But if you say yes, you might want to say what's on the list. So go ahead, take a few minutes just to kick this idea around. Do you know what Waldo looks like? Yeah, breathing and heartbeat can be an assumption. Just remember, if this is what a potential leader looks like, you're supposed to emulate that already. Okay, let's move on just a little bit here. By the way, just a little sidebar. At E2, we're often asked, well, what is an elder expected to do? And we did a study of the book of Acts and said if we were actually reading the book of Acts and asked what do elders have to do, we came up with this: they pray, they preach and teach, they set policy. Now somebody said, where do you get that from? Well, Acts chapter 15, the Jerusalem Council, at the end, they said, okay, it seems good to us. Here's what they ought to do. And they wrote it up in a letter and sent it around. They provide pastoral care and they protect the church. And we know it's right because they all start with P. So, see, homiletics from the 1980s. Okay. But once again, prayer, preach, policy, pastoral care, and protect. But a third question has to come up, or a third step. Now that you know who you're looking for and you've kind of gone, that person seems to be the kind of person we need, you engage the potential leader. Now, when I say engage, this is where it also gets into your spiritual life, because it kind of presumes, A, what you expected from them, you already have. I mean, if I say, oh, a potential leader is really teachable, and you're not, that's a problem. Well, how do you engage them? Well, I try to catch them in the lobby, and I find the one that I know can't outrun me. No. Don't do that. How do you engage? Well, you engage by equipping. Now, how do you equip somebody? This is where it comes down to how do we feed ourselves and feed others at the same time. First off, and we're going to look at each one of these, group study. Wouldn't be bad to actually have some kind of classroom or small group of potential leaders. They may not even know they are a potential leader. You just invited them to study Philippians. And by the way, why did I pick Philippians? It's the only book in the New Testament that is actually addressed to the overseers and deacons. To all the saints in Philippi with overseers and deacons. And if I were an elder or deacon sitting in Philippi and, hey, we got a letter from Paul, I would have been a meerkat when I heard that introduction. Wait, what? What's he going to say about us? So there's a lot of messages to leaders throughout the book of Philippians. And by the way, College Press is going to be coming out with a book on that very soon. Yes. Mentor. Okay. Once again, we're going to look into this, but another way to do it is to say, I'm going to invite somebody just to kind of go out and sit down, have coffee with me, talk about life, pray, pour into this person, help them grow one-on-one spiritual, maybe a triad people. Supervision. Whatever an elder does, I'm going to invite them to go along with me. You know how I learned to actually do visitor follow-up? I got invited by an elder to go do visitor follow-up. And so I learned how to do it and what not to do and what to do. What else? Just self-directed. We're going to look at each one of these. But like I said, just the idea of what can I do on my own? And by doing it on my own, I can then go, hey, I read this book. You want to get together and read it together? Hey, I got this subscription I'm going to get. I got one for you too. See, so once again, these are ways you grow spiritually yourself. You grow as a leader yourself. And at the same time, you can use them to do what? Go to potential leaders and help grow them. So what do each of these look like? Well, the group study, this is the principal means of delivering instruction in the history of the class in the world is the classroom. I teach a class. It's a great class, History and Philosophy of Education. By the way, it's a Thursday block class going from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. once a month. It's riveting. Okay, but let me tell you the truth. I get to show a lot of lovely PowerPoints, and the PowerPoints are just full of, this is what an ancient classroom looked like. This is what a medieval classroom looked like. This is what, with the exception of changes in technology, that's about it. It's a bunch of tables and chairs and people sitting there going. The simple fact is, classrooms are the standard way we teach. But here's the truth. You can't learn a lot about ministry where? In a classroom. You can learn about it, but you don't really know it till you do it. So I'm going, there's limits. It's a good place to start. You just can't finish in the classroom. And I teach for a seminary, and they love it when I make that announcement. Because, oh, come here and study how to do ministry. Yes, we can teach you how to do ministry, and we can help you avoid some of the pitfalls, and we can teach Scripture, and we can help you grow. We can help you develop relationships and a network. We can do all kinds of wonderful things, but we can't teach you to preach until you're really in the pulpit and getting feedback. So that's why I'm going, it isn't just group study. There's limits to it. It can be great for orienting you, giving you information, This idea of group study where you're studying maybe the pastoral epistles or Philippians or a book like one on the back table. Leaders retreats and advances, spiritual formation through communal study. By the way, I mentioned that Lead Well conference. Wouldn't it be great to bring your elders, but also to go, who is a potential leader in the church? Let's invite them to a conference. That'd be the simplest thing to do. It's great for developing this. Classrooms are great about just the mind, but we are not just brains on a stick. So we have to have something for other parts of who we are. Mentoring. Pouring your life into somebody else's. Personal accountability, discipleship, and leadership. There is definitely a connection. I really appreciate that Gene went first because his ability to go, it's about the quality of the person. You need your leaders to first be disciples. By the way, spiritual direction and formation. Think about it. Sitting down with somebody and going, what can we pray for? Or I'm struggling with this. Well, then maybe we need to help you find counseling or spiritual care, something. Building relationships. And I've mentioned just following Paul's example. 1 Corinthians 11, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. 1 Timothy 1, 2, Timothy, my true son in the faith. He used a lot of familial terms with the people who were his partners in ministry. And I'm going, that talks to that relationship element. And by the way, mentoring really gets to the affective, the values, the character of an individual. You see, I can talk about a certain value or character element in a classroom, but here I'm drinking coffee and we're talking one-on-one, and we can actually dialogue. We can actually share. We can actually admit. See what I'm getting at? So if you just have the classroom, it's not enough. What about supervision? It's kind of like on-the-job training. Remember how you learned to ride a bicycle? Your parents brought out that flat screen and had a PowerPoint on the history and philosophy of bicycle riding? No. They probably put you first not on a bicycle, but what? Training wheels. Okay, or a tricycle to learn how to do the pedals. Then they put training wheels, notice the word, and that way you could lean either way. And then eventually they said, now, we're going to remove the left one, so learn to lean right, okay? Hopefully you knew your left from your right. And eventually, as you notice that you weren't exactly having to hit the ground with that right training wheel, let's take that off and see if you can stay balanced. And even then, a good parent did what? Kind of ran behind you and, yeah. and eventually what? You're just riding a bike. And that's my point. That's learning by supervision. And so the point being here, we can learn ministry by actually doing it with the supervision of others. It's spiritual formation through service. So basically it's used best for skill development, where you basically accompany an experienced other person and watch. Then you work with that person, and then you do it with their input, and then you do it yourself. And then you're experienced enough to share it with another person. You know what's great? If you read the Gospel of Mark and ask the question, how is Jesus relating to the disciples? Well, first off, he's doing great miracles, and they're on the sidelines going, that was pretty impressive. Then he's like, why don't you come over here and help me with this? Then he sends him off on what I joke about the first internship. He kind of goes down, why don't you go out and try this and come back? We tried to cast out a demon, and yeah, you didn't do it. Let me explain. And then at the end, what does he do? Great Commission. I'll be with you, but you're working in your own. I'm not going to physically be here anymore. And I'm like, there you go. And by the way, your job is to now do what? Be disciples who make disciples, and now be leaders who make more leaders. So it's skills. Now, by the way, self-directed, knowing how to teach myself, becoming a lifelong learner. Little tidbit here. Think of this. When you have a baby, how many of you have ever had a baby in the house? It's like you have to do everything for them, right? Yeah, it is really like that. Now, by the way, you have to actually prepare the food, change their diaper. You've got to do everything. Now, when they're a child, by the way, they can feed themselves. They can even dress themselves. Depending on how old, they can take care of themselves, but you still have to be there. You've got to prepare the food. They might be able to put something like a Hot Pocket in a microwave, but you've got to, you're still there. You're still kind of guiding. And as an adult, hopefully, they can do all that on their own. But when you're a parent, you may be an adult, but that's different than being an adult because a parent assumes the role to do what? Change the diaper, take care of the baby, guide the. Be honest with you, leaders are really assuming the role of parent. It isn't just a matter of, yeah, I'm a grown-up now. I'm assuming the role of feeding others. My point simply is this. Here, you're able to feed yourself. You're growing. This is self-directed. So personal development, keep current with all the changes in ministry, scholarship, society, and culture. I actually like to articulate this or advocate this. I call it the 1-1-1-1 principle. Try to read one book per month. If you go, oh, Jim, that's way too much. Okay, every 2 months. Because the average American reads less than 2 books a year. So my point is, anybody ever work with concrete? What do you have to do with concrete to make sure it doesn't set up? Yeah, that's why those big drums go around and around. Here's my point. What happens to your mind if it's not constantly doing what? It becomes hard as a brick. It's concrete. Have you ever run into a leader whose mind is one of concrete? Try to introduce change. Try to tell them something's happened. You got to do things differently. See, once again, what we're trying to do is make sure the drum never stops. So read one book a month. Attend at least one conference a year. Congratulations, you can check it off. Subscribe to one Christian magazine or journal. Because what's that? Well, once every 2 months or whatever, you're going to get a copy of it. And visit one healthy church per year. Maybe you're on vacation. Maybe you're on sabbatical. But either way, think about it. You're on vacation. Tell somebody, hey, I'm heading to Indianapolis. What would be a good church to go to while I'm on vacation? I've got a couple you could visit. And you get to go there and you see how they treat first-time guests. You get to go in there and graze a little bit, pick up all their pamphlets about ministry. You get to go and just experience it. And then you come back and go, I've got ideas. And once again, this is just you becoming responsible enough to say, I can feed myself. But why am I, as a leader, I'm feeding myself so I can do what ultimately? Feed others. So this helps fulfill all the 3 previous, learning up here, learning in the heart, learning in the hands. You're doing all 3. And so what ends up happening is when you have this, you've got a very knowledgeable leader, a self-aware, growing person, a skilled, capable person, and a lifelong learner. Now, by the way, that's ideal, and you can't do all 4 necessarily. I get it. But my point is you can pick 1 or 2 of these things to start with. And so what method or methods do you do to engage potential leaders? Because once again, inviting them out for coffee, you don't go, I'm recruiting you to become a leader. No, you're just inviting them to coffee. You're trying to assess whether they even are, the right stuff. You're not inviting them to take a leadership class. You're saying, come to a Bible study. By the way, what would happen if a leader, a potential leader who you thought would be great goes, I don't like studying the Bible? Probably not a good pick. See, these are indications for you. So what methods could you use to bring potential leaders into essentially the plan you use to develop as a leader? Go ahead. You can discuss that. We'll press pause and go from there. Take a few minutes. All right, just trying to make sure we move along and have the time to finish off the presentation. We can go ahead and take a look up here. Number 4, select qualified candidates. So here's the point. We start looking at people who we think they've been potential leaders. Here's the current leadership team. And we have to sit there and say what? Well, more specific requirements. There's a few of them that are really, measuring up. We don't need every potential leader to step forward at this time. We've got two that seem to be the cream rising to the top. And so you select the qualified candidates. And so I want to do like one or two of these conversations at once. Does your leadership team have a screening process? So now that we've actually identified these potential leaders, to approach them and say, are we ready to take the next step with them? Do we have that articulated? But then you have to invite the candidate to serve as a leader. Step number 5. This may involve an initial contact. And by the way, the initial contact should not be, do you want to be a leader? It's, would you pray about this decision? Would you think about this? Because we'd like to talk to you about it. So we don't want you thinking about doing it. Would you like to hear about it? May we approach you? In other words, help them warm up to the idea. Invite them to consider it, maybe to have prayer, talk to their family. Maybe they have other people they respect. Offer them some kind of orientation. Well, what exactly does it mean, to be an elder, a deacon, a ministry team leader, whatever you're recruiting them to? And then whatever vetting procedure. I know Gene Getz talked about, the questionnaire, the interview, meeting with current leaders. I would always involve the spouse. Always involve the spouse. Like him, I've got some wonderful stories I could go where something just went completely off kilter because we had a great candidate, but the spouse was not on board with it. And then you make your selection. So do you have a leadership team with a vetting process and procedure? And that's the big thing I want us to pause on. Do you have some kind of step-by-step vetting process? So even if there was a potential leader there, what do you do with them? How do you approach them? What do you have ready to put in there? By the way, that orientation, I one time, went to recruit somebody to lead our prayer ministry because I was asked to do that. And the person looked at me and said, well, what does the chairperson of the prayer ministry do? And guess what my answer was? Pray. I have no real idea. They didn't have a written job description. They didn't even have, and by the way, I'm not big on 2-page job descriptions. I'm talking like a 3x5 card. Here's the 4 things you're responsible for. Thank you. I'm just talking about a general, here's what you do. And the point being here, didn't even have that. So how did I vet this? How do you know I have the right stuff if you don't know what the position requires? See, and you start going, what do you know? Good point. And I'm going, have a vetting process that says, here's how we approach you, and here's what we're asking you to do, and we're ready to do this. So go ahead. Do you have it? Is a yes or no question. What do you do? Okay, if I can go ahead and get our attention back. Step number 6, affirm their selection. Now, when I say affirm, this may involve introducing them or notifying the congregation. I don't know what your affirmation protocol is. And by that, I mean, sorry to use this word, we've had a wonderful time together, bylaws. I don't know what every church's practice is or bylaws require. You know, I've seen some churches that you don't have to vote on leaders. Others, you have to vote on the decision. So like a confidence, no confidence vote on the leadership appointing. And other times it's a straight out Democratic, we love that candidate. I don't know how it works in your church, and I'm not prescribing it. I can tell you what E2 would prefer to see happen, but whatever the affirmation protocol is, use it. And by the way, is there a symbolic element? Now, by the way, laying on of hands, for example, is a biblical symbolic element. But I know a church in California that brings them forward. They kneel and they are knighted. And they literally receive a sword with their name embossed on it. Yes, tell me about it. I'm like, I want to go there. And they give the person the sword and a thing to set it on their mantle of their fireplace with. And I'm like, that's the one I want to go to. Well, I was trying to convince Lincoln. They had a degree called the Master of Arts in Christian Ed, MACE. Let's give them a mace. Let's give, when they cross the stage, forget the diploma, hand them this. But by the way, I was actually at the church in Georgia did something really special. Whenever you became an elder, they gave you a shepherd's crook. Oh, you can buy those on Amazon, like everything else. Okay. But we did one thing that before I left, one of the coolest things I've ever seen was an entire congregation breaking down in tears. We were ordaining several new elders, and one was a rather young man. His father had been an elder before him, but had now retired, moved away from the town, was in another city, another church, and he didn't know it, but we invited his father to come back and get behind stage. And then we looked at him and said, Chad, we didn't order enough staffs, so we're one short. And he's like, don't worry about it. I don't need one. It's all right. And so as we're ordaining them here, he gets up to get ordained. He says, oh, wait, I think we have a staff. And his father came out with the staff that had been given to him 30 years ago and handed it to his son. There was not there were men crying in the audience. And I'm going, that symbolic element is kind of something that really conveys this, that this is something not in the ordinary. And by the way, that's when you start the perpetual equipping and resourcing. Those 4 things, you go, hey, let's, as a new leader in the church, we got you a subscription. Hey, as a new leader, we all go to this conference. Hey, as a new leader, we're all going to read this book and we're going to go on a retreat. Hey, as a leader, we're putting you in a triad with other leaders to kind of be an accountability partner. And you start growing spiritually with each other. It increases your spiritual capacity to bring on more leaders. And so here's the thing, I could ask this just for how do you affirm new leaders? What is the actual protocol and the symbolic? And without dictating it all, E2 strongly likes to get away from votes. E2 really does say, basically, you appoint new leaders based on the qualifications, not on their popularity. And therefore, they are announced to the congregation, so they're aware, but there is no congregational affirmation. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Not only we do feel it's biblical, but on the practical side, there's like a number of reasons where the alternative, because I know Paul expected us to have an annual meeting, the Apostle Paul, in November so we could vote, because that's what it says in the Book of First Opinions. But, I'm like, it's amazing how much incursion from culture has occurred into the church, and that's one of the ways it occurred. But once again, what is your actual affirmation protocol? How do you actually make them a leader? So go ahead, talk about that a little bit. And by the way, as we approach the conclusion, please realize this is an ongoing process. I intentionally used participles throughout the entire thing. You're developing, preparing, engaging, selecting, inviting, and affirming. This is not a one-time process. This is circular because leaders make leaders, and spiritual leaders make spiritual leaders. And so your spiritual growth, your increased spiritual capacity allows you to also produce spiritual leaders for the future in the next generation. So just some time for some table talk, which has to involve coffee. The handout that you had originally is just a follow-up. It's something we can do for a few minutes here, where it said, I don't have a copy of it myself. Yes, it kind of asks you to look and assess what we talked about today. It might be a good. And by the way, the reason I'm giving you some of this stuff is if you said, "Hey Jim, send me this email, send me this PowerPoint," I can also send you the handouts. And what can you do when you go back to your church? You can just walk through it and say, let's assess how we're doing this. And by the way, I'm not making this a commercial, but E2 made material that can help at virtually any stage of this. So if we can be a resource to you, here's my contact information. Jim at E2 Elders, that's my mobile phone. I even give you my office number at DTS, which, by the way, I can't escape. If you call that number right now, my phone would ding because it would turn your voicemail. It would turn your voicemail into an email and send it to me. So once again, if I can be of service, if you go, but Jim, I'm in Oklahoma, close enough. Okay. The simple fact is, if I can be of service, or if you're just going, hey, I need to get in touch with somebody at E2, call me and I can get you there. But it's been a pleasure. But right now, discuss around the table, and then if we have any time left, I know there'll be Q&A. But go ahead, take the handout, discuss around your table. Mhm. Take care. All right, Karen. Okay, if I can go ahead and get your attention. I've already gotten one email wanting a copy of the PowerPoint, so I'll try to get to that in a day or two. But notice I do have my email here. On the bottom of the page that you all were just working on is my contact information. So once again, if you need us, reach out. E2 is kind of like your one-stop shop for anything about leadership development in the church, as well as church revitalization and resourcing. And when I say that, if you said, well, Jim, do you have training resources on evangelism? Yes. Disciple making? Yes. Can you do leading small groups? Sure. So once again, if we can be of service, contact me and I'll tell you either what we can do, what we can't do, and direct you to somebody who can really help. So I just want to say thank you and appreciate the opportunity to be here.